I've lived in plenty of neighborhoods in my life, but none of them ever felt as strange as the one I moved into 2 years ago. At first glance, it was ordinary enough. Rows of modest houses with neat yards, old cars parked along the street, the occasional sound of kids riding their bikes or lawnmowers buzzing on weekends. It had that false sense of normalcy, the kind you only really notice once it starts to unravel. And it unraveled for me the first night I noticed the window. The house next door had been empty when I moved in, or so I was told. The real estate agent mentioned it offhandedly. That one's been vacant for a while, so you'll have peace and quiet. And I did like the quiet. That's why I chose the place, but 3 days in, I was standing at my kitchen sink late at night, rinsing out a glass, when I happened to glance up at the house next door. It was dark, except for one thing, the upstairs window. It was open. Wide open, curtains fluttering slightly in the breeze. I thought nothing of it at first. Maybe someone had been in there, maybe maintenance crews or squatters. But the next night it was open again. Same position, curtains swaying, and the next night, and the next. Rain came one evening. Heavy pounding rain. I remember watching water stream down the glass of my own kitchen window, listening to the thunder shake the house. I looked over at the neighbor's place, half expecting to see that damn window finally closed, but it wasn't. The rain poured in, soaking the curtains, but it never closed. That's when I really started paying attention. I began to notice how wrong it was, not just that it was always open, but that it was too open. The curtains didn't just flutter in the wind, they jerked sometimes, like something had pulled them from inside. And once, just once, I swore I saw a shape behind the curtain, a figure. I convinced myself it was my imagination. Had to be, but that night I dreamed about it. The dream was vivid like a movie. I stood outside the house staring up at the window, and the curtain pulled aside slowly, revealing a pale, gray face with hollow black eyes staring down at me. I woke up drenched in sweat. From then on, I couldn't ignore it. Every night I checked that window, and every night it was there, open, waiting like an eye that never blinked. About 2 weeks after I moved in, I finally asked around. One of the older neighbors, a woman named Jean who'd lived there for decades, gave me the first real clue. That house has been empty since the Collins boy disappeared, she said, lowering her voice as if afraid someone might overhear. They looked for him for months, but he was just gone. His parents moved away not long after. No one's touched it since. I asked her if she ever noticed the window. She went pale. It's always been like that, she whispered. Always open. Doesn't matter if anyone's living there or not. Some of the kids used to dare each other to go inside, but none of them made it past the front door. They said the air felt wrong, heavy, like the house didn't want them there. I laughed it off at the time, but inside I was rattled. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was in that house, behind that window. The real breaking point came one night around 3 a.m. I was awake, scrolling aimlessly on my phone in bed, when I heard it, a soft tapping sound. I froze, listening. It wasn't in my house. It was faint but steady. Tap, tap, tap. I got up, crept to the window of my own bedroom and looked outside. The sound was coming from the neighbor's house, from the window. I stared, heart pounding, and as I watched, the curtain pulled back slowly. There was nothing behind it, just darkness. But the tapping didn't stop. Tap, tap, tap. I slammed my blinds shut and crawled back into bed, covers pulled up to my chin like I was 10 years old again. I didn't sleep. Not a minute. The next morning I went over there. I don't know what I thought I'd do. Maybe prove to myself it was just some loose shutter or a branch against the glass. Something normal. The front door was locked, but the porch was rotten and creaked under my weight. I circled around the side yard, weeds grabbing at my ankles until I stood beneath that window. Up close, it looked worse. The paint around the frame was peeling, and the wood was warped with age. The curtains were stained and moldy, and the window itself, it wasn't just open. The glass was cracked like something had pressed hard against it from the inside. I swear to you, standing there beneath it, I felt watched. Like something was leaning over the sill just out of sight, staring down at me. I backed away and went home, telling myself I was done with it. But I wasn't. That night, I had another dream. I was in my bed, but I couldn't move. The covers were heavy, pinning me down. And slowly, the sound of tapping filled the room. I turned my head, straining to see, and there it was, the neighbor's window. But it wasn't across the yard anymore. It was inside my room, hanging in the air where my wall should have been. The curtain parted, and the same pale, gray face leaned through, eyes like pits, mouth stretching into a grin that split too wide. Too wrong. I woke up screaming. From then on, it wasn't just the window. I started hearing things inside my house. Little creaks, soft dragging sounds at night. Once I woke to find my own window cracked open, even though I always kept it locked. And sometimes in the corner of my eye, I'd catch it, a flicker of white, like a curtain swaying. Inside my own home. It got so bad that I finally called a friend of mine, Jason, and begged him to come over. I needed someone else to see it to prove I wasn't losing my mind. He showed up one Saturday night armed with a six-pack and skepticism. I told him everything, and he laughed at first. Man, it's just a busted window. You've been living alone too long. But then we sat at the kitchen table, lights off, both of us staring out at the house next door. And we waited. At first, nothing happened. Then, just after midnight, the curtain shifted. Jason leaned forward. "You see that?" Before I could answer, the tapping started, slow, deliberate. Tap, tap, tap. Jason went dead silent. His face went pale, and then, as we both stared, the curtain pulled back all the way. Something leaned into view. I don't have the words to describe it right. It wasn't just a face, it was wrong. The proportions were twisted, the eyes too deep, the mouth too wide. But worst of all, it was looking directly at us. Jason cursed under his breath and backed away from the table. I couldn't move. I just sat there paralyzed as the thing's grin widened. Then the curtain fell back into place. Silence. Jason left that night and never came back. He won't answer my calls anymore, and me, I haven't slept in days, because the window isn't just next door anymore, it's here in my room. And last night, when I finally dared to open my eyes in the dark, I saw the curtain hanging just inches from my bed, and something breathing on the other side. When I first moved into the city, I thought I'd finally escaped the small-town paranoia that clung to me for most of my life. I grew up in the kind of place where everyone knew each other's business and every creak of an old house was blamed on ghosts. Moving into a sixth-floor apartment in a concrete high-rise felt like freedom. Sterile hallways, anonymous faces, neighbors who didn't look at you twice. For the first couple of months, it was exactly what I wanted. My building was old but not crumbling. The walls were thin enough to hear muffled TV shows through. The elevators worked most of the time and the rent was barely manageable. I didn't ask for much, but then I noticed apartment 6A. It was directly across the hall from mine. At first, it looked no different from the other doors. Beige paint, a tarnished peephole, a dented brass number plate. But there were little details I picked up on after a while. For one, I never saw anyone go in or out. Not once. And I was home a lot, working late nights on freelance projects. The hallway was quiet and I would have noticed. Second, there was the smell. A faint, musty odor that lingered outside the door. It wasn't strong, not enough to complain about, but it was off, like damp wood and old fabric. And third, the door was always unlocked. I didn't discover that until the night I came home tipsy and accidentally tried to put my key into 6A instead of my own. The knob turned easily. The door cracked open into darkness and I stumbled back in shock. I didn't go inside. But I stood there for a good minute, staring into the gap, half expecting someone to yell at me. No one did. That's when I realized no one lived there, or at least no one who cared about locking doors. I tried to ignore it, but 6A had a way of pulling me in. Every time I stepped out of my apartment, my eyes darted to that door. Every time I came home late, I listened for movement inside. There never was any, until there was. It started small, soft sounds behind the door at night. A shuffle, a creak, like someone walking slowly from one side of the apartment to the other. I told myself it was pipes, or maybe the building settling. But deep down, I knew the difference. One night around 2 a.m., I heard a knock. It wasn't at my door. It was from inside 6A, 3 knocks, slow, hollow. I stood in my own hallway, frozen, every hair on my body standing on end. I didn't answer. I didn't move. The next morning, I convinced myself I'd imagined it. But then it happened again the following night. Same time, same slow, deliberate knocks. I couldn't take it anymore. Curiosity outweighed fear, so I went inside. It was late evening, maybe 11 p.m. when I finally worked up the nerve. The hall was quiet, lights buzzing faintly overhead. I walked across, heart pounding, and put my hand on the knob of 6A. It turned easily, just like before. The door creaked open, releasing a gust of stale air that smelled like wet carpet and dust. I flicked on the light from the hallway. The apartment was empty. No furniture, no boxes, nothing but bare wooden floors and stained walls. The wallpaper was peeling in places, exposing cracked plaster beneath. The air was heavy, damp, clinging to my skin. I stepped inside. The place was completely silent, but it didn't feel silent. It felt like the air itself was humming. I walked through the living room, into the kitchen, empty. Then down the short hallway toward what I assumed were bedrooms. That's when I noticed the window. It was wide open, curtains fluttering in the night breeze. Something about it unsettled me. 6th floor, no fire escape, just a straight drop to the street below. Yet the window stood open like someone had just climbed through. I shut it quickly and turned back toward the hallway, and froze. There were footprints on the floor. Dust coated the entire apartment. Thick layers undisturbed except for a trail of prints leading from the open window to the living room. And they weren't mine. Bare feet. Long. Narrow. The toes pressed too deeply, like whoever made them had leaned heavily into the steps. I backed out of there so fast I nearly tripped over the threshold, slammed the door shut, locked mine, and spent the night with every light in my apartment blazing. The next morning I told myself it didn't mean anything. Maybe squatters. Maybe kids. Something logical. But logic failed me the following night, because the knocking came again. Only this time, it was at my door. 3 slow knocks. I didn't answer. I didn't breathe. I just stared at the door, waiting. A few minutes later, I got the courage to look through the peephole, and there it was. Someone standing directly outside 6A, not facing its door, facing mine. It was tall, unnaturally so, its head nearly brushing the hallway ceiling. It wore nothing but shadows, its form blending into the dim light except for the face. And God, that face. It was pale, stretched tight with eyes too wide and black as holes. Its mouth hung open slightly as if mid-breath. I stumbled back, hand over my mouth to keep from screaming. The thing didn't move. It just stood there, staring at my door through the peephole like it knew I was looking. Finally, I snapped. I shouted, banged on my door, threatened to call the cops. When I dared to look again, it was gone. But the door to 6A was standing wide open. I didn't sleep that night. Didn't sleep the next either. Every sound in the hallway set me on edge, and then, 2 nights later, I woke to something worse. Not knocking. Not footsteps. Breathing inside my apartment. Slow, deep, labored breaths coming from the corner of my dark bedroom. I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. I just lay there listening to it, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would explode. Minutes passed. Hours, maybe. At some point, I blacked out from sheer exhaustion. When I opened my eyes, sunlight streamed through the blinds. My room was empty, but the door to my apartment, it was open, wide open, and across the hall, 6A's door was shut tight. I don't know how long I can keep living here. I've thought about leaving, breaking my lease, running far from this building. But part of me is afraid it won't matter, because sometimes, when I close my eyes, I can still hear it breathing. And last night, I dreamed of the open window again, only this time, it wasn't in 6A. It was in my bedroom wall, and something was climbing through. I used to think the suburbs were safe. I grew up in them. Quiet streets, trimmed lawns, the occasional block party with lukewarm beer and plastic chairs. When my wife and I bought our first home, it was in a cul-de-sac just like the one I'd known as a kid. Safe, predictable, that's what we wanted, but safety is just an illusion. And illusions crack. It started the first week after we moved in. We were unloading boxes in the living room when my wife, Sarah, glanced out the sliding glass door that led to our backyard. "Do we have neighbors behind us?" she asked. "Yeah, there's another row of houses," I said, distracted with stacking books. "No, I mean, right there." I looked up. In the corner of our yard, just past the tree line, a man stood watching us. He was tall, dressed in dark clothes, hands hanging loosely at his sides. Too far away to see his face clearly, but close enough that we knew he was staring. I froze. Sarah whispered, "Should I wave?" I shook my head. Something about him didn't feel like the waving type. We turned away, tried to ignore it, but when I looked back, he was gone. I brushed it off as a nosy neighbor, maybe curious about the new couple. But that night, lying in bed, I couldn't stop replaying it. The stillness of him. The way he hadn't moved a muscle. The next morning, I checked. Nothing in the yard. No footprints in the grass. For a few days, everything was normal until I saw him again. It was late, around midnight. I'd gone downstairs for water. As I passed the sliding door, movement caught my eye. The man was standing there again, this time closer, just beyond the patio. I couldn't see his face, only the outline of his body against the faint glow of a street lamp beyond the trees. He wasn't moving, just standing, watching. I grabbed my phone to call the cops, but when I looked again, the yard was empty. No sound of footsteps, no rustling leaves, just gone. When I told Sarah, she didn't laugh. She just got quiet, her lips pressed tight. I thought I saw him too, she admitted. 2 nights ago, watching from the trees. That's when the fear really sank in. We set up lights in the yard, motion sensors, the works. For a week, nothing happened. Then one night, the lights flicked on at 3 a.m. I jumped out of bed, ran to the sliding door. There he was, right at the edge of the light, closer than ever. I yelled, banged on the glass, but he didn't react, didn't flinch. He just stood there. I called the police. They arrived 15 minutes later, searched the yard, the woods, everything, no one. No footprints. They told us it was probably a trespasser, maybe a homeless guy cutting through. They promised extra patrols, but they didn't understand. It wasn't random. He was watching us. Weeks passed. He'd appear, then vanish, always in the yard, always silent. Then one night, Sarah woke me. Her voice was trembling. He's closer. I sat up, heart hammering, and there he was, right outside the sliding glass door, just standing. His face was inches from the glass, pale, expressionless. His eyes, they were too dark, like pits that swallowed the light. I grabbed a baseball bat and rushed forward, ready to swing. But as soon as I reached the door, he was gone. No sound. No movement, just empty yard. That night, we didn't sleep. The next day, I bought cameras, installed them around the house, every angle covered. For 3 nights, nothing. No alerts. On the 4th night, the system pinged. Motion detected. Backyard. I opened the app, heart racing, and froze. The footage showed the man, standing in the yard staring at the camera. Then he raised his hand, slowly, deliberately, and waved. The clip ended there. I checked the live feed. Nothing. He was gone again. I went through the footage frame by frame, and that's when I saw it. His face wasn't clear. It was blurred, distorted, like the camera couldn't focus. Everything else was sharp. Grass, trees, even the bugs flying past the lens. But not him. I showed Sarah. She cried. We went to the police again, showed them the footage. They shrugged, said maybe it was a glitch, said they couldn't do much unless he broke in. That night, we pushed furniture against the doors, locked every window. But at 2 a.m., I woke to a noise, a soft tap, tap, tap. I sat up, holding my breath. It was coming from downstairs. I grabbed the bat, crept down. The sound grew louder. Tap, 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 from the sliding glass door. I raised the bat, ready, and saw it. Not the man. The glass. It was cracked. 3 long cracks spreading from the center, as if something had pressed against it from the outside. But the cameras never triggered. I checked the feeds over and over. Nothing. The man wasn't there. Or maybe he was. And the cameras just couldn't see him anymore. That was a month ago. Now, it's worse, because he doesn't just stay in the yard. Sometimes I hear footsteps upstairs when Sarah's asleep beside me. Sometimes I see movement in the corner of the room, just past the edge of my vision. And last night, I woke to find the sliding door wide open, the curtains swaying, and muddy footprints on the floor, leading from the backyard into our bedroom.